Karen slaps EMT during medical emergency. She was tased and arrested on site. I was kneeling over my husband's body on our own driveway when the HOA president slapped the paramedic trying to save his life. Her name was Marlene Voss, and in 3 years she'd never once knocked before entering our lives. That night, sirens screaming, she cared more about a fire truck's tire marks than my husband's heartbeat. What happened next would end her 12-year reign, but it took 8 brutal months to get there. My name is Danielle Ruiz, and this is how I destroyed the woman who almost let my husband die. We moved into Willow Creek Estates in Ohio 4 years ago, chasing the quiet cul-de-sac dream. Marlene Voss ran the HOA board like a private kingdom, and everyone treated her like royalty. At first she seemed helpful, dropping off a welcome basket with a smile stretched too tight. I didn't know yet that basket came with an invoice, buried in fine print about community fees. My husband Tom laughed it off. "It's just a homeowners association," he said. "How bad can it be?" Bad enough that within a year, Marlene had fined 3 neighbors for grass exceeding 4 inches. She measured with an actual ruler, kneeling in strangers' yards like a drill sergeant inspecting boots. Nobody challenged her. She sat on the county's HOA arbitration committee, a friend in high places. Our first real interaction came when Tom painted our shutters a shade she called aggressively navy. She left a citation on our door before we'd even finished the second coat of paint. I laughed at first. Surely this was petty theater, not something worth losing sleep over. I was wrong. Marlene didn't do petty. Marlene did patient, calculated, relentless control. Every rule she enforced was legal, technically, buried deep in a 50-page covenant nobody read. That was her genius, and her weapon. She never broke rules. She weaponized them. The shutter's fine was $200. We paid it, thinking that would be. It wasn't. Within weeks, she cited our mailbox post for being 1 inch off-center. Tom joked that Marlene needed a hobby. I started keeping a folder. Just in case. That folder would become the most important document of my life, though I didn't know it yet. Spring came, and with it, Marlene's obsession with our new vegetable garden along the fence line. Unauthorized landscaping, she wrote, though 3 other houses had gardens twice the size. I asked why ours was different. She smiled and said, "I make the calls here, sweetheart." That word, sweetheart, dripped with a condescension I'd remember for the rest of the story. I started photographing everything: dates, citations, her handwriting, even her car in our driveway. Something in my gut told me this woman would eventually go too far and I'd need proof. By summer, the fines totaled over $1,000, and Marlene threatened a lien on our home. A lien. Over a garden and a mailbox post. My hands shook reading that letter twice. I called the HOA office. A tired clerk named Priya sighed and said, "Everyone deals with Marlene." "Deals with her how?" I asked. Priya went quiet, then whispered, "Just document everything. Trust me." That warning sat heavy in my chest for weeks, a splinter I couldn't quite pull out. Tom wanted to fight the fines in small claims court. I wanted evidence first, real evidence. So I started attending every HOA meeting, recording audio, legally, per Ohio's one-party consent law. Marlene never suspected the quiet woman in the back row was building a case against her. She underestimated me completely, the way she underestimated everyone who didn't fight back loudly. That underestimation, I would learn, was the crack in her armor I needed to widen. Then came August and the incident that changed everything, the night Tom collapsed in our yard. He'd been mowing the lawn when he grabbed his chest and dropped like a puppet cut loose. I screamed for help, dialed 911 with trembling fingers, praying the ambulance would fly. Neighbors gathered. Someone called Marlene, because apparently emergencies still required board notification. She arrived before the second responder truck, marching up in her robe like she owned the crisis. "You can't block the fire hydrant access with that stretcher cart," she snapped at the EMT. The EMT, a young woman named Sasha, ignored her and kept working on Tom's chest. Marlene grabbed Sasha's shoulder to physically move her aside, and Sasha's hand slipped from the defibrillator pads. "Get your hands off her," I screamed, but Marlene shoved forward again, obsessed with her hydrant rule. Then it happened. Marlene slapped Sasha across the face when the EMT pushed back to keep working. Time stopped. The whole cul-de-sac watched Marlene Voss strike a paramedic mid-resuscitation. A second officer, already on scene for traffic control, moved in within seconds. "Ma'am, step back now," he ordered. Marlene, incredibly, shoved him too, screaming about her authority. That was the moment the taser came out, and Marlene Voss hit the pavement, twitching, cuffed. My husband was loaded into the ambulance as the HOA president was loaded into a squad car. I rode with Tom, hands shaking, staring at his pale face, praying he'd survive the night. He did. A cardiac event, serious but treatable. The doctors said minutes had mattered enormously. Minutes that Marlene had stolen, fighting over hydrant access while a paramedic tried to save him. The story hit local news within hours. HOA president tased after assaulting EMT on duty. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt something colder, sharper, the start of a plan. Because I knew Marlene. And I knew this arrest alone would never be enough to end her. The next morning, I sat in Tom's hospital room, scrolling the local news comments in disbelief. Half our neighbors defended Marlene, calling it a misunderstanding, an emotional overreaction, not really assault. I realized then how deep her influence ran, years of favors, fear and quiet manipulation. "They're scared of her," Tom rasped from his hospital bed, oxygen tube taped beneath his nose. "She's controlled this neighborhood so long, people forgot they're allowed to stand up to her." I squeezed his hand and made a silent promise: this wasn't going to be forgotten or forgiven. Marlene posted bail within 6 hours, thanks to a lawyer named Griffith Cole, expensive and slick. By the following week, Griffith had already spun a narrative, Marlene as the real victim. Local paper ran a follow-up quote from her: "I was simply protecting emergency access protocols." No apology to Sasha. No mention of Tom. Just protocols, procedures and plausible deniability. I felt my folder, months of fines, citations, recordings, suddenly matter more than ever. This wasn't just about a slap anymore. This was about a pattern, and patterns convict people. I contacted a lawyer, Renata Ibarra, who specialized in HOA abuse cases across the state. She read my documentation for 20 minutes in total silence, then looked up and smiled. "This is the most organized retaliation case I've seen in years," Renata said. "We can win." Win wasn't enough for me. I wanted Marlene stripped of every ounce of power she held. Renata explained Ohio law: HOA board members could be removed for breach of fiduciary duty. Selective enforcement, fining some residents while ignoring others, was exactly that kind of breach. We needed more homeowners willing to testify. I started knocking on doors that same week. Most people flinched at Marlene's name, still terrified of fines, liens, or her legendary grudges. Then I met Harold Whitfield, an elderly widower Marlene had fined for his late wife's memorial bench. She said it violated yard ornament rules, Harold told me, voice cracking. It was Ruth's bench. Harold agreed to testify. So did the Nguyen's, fined for a wheelchair ramp Marlene called unsightly. Slowly, my folder grew into a binder, then a box, then a pattern too big to deny. Meanwhile, Marlene doubled down, holding an emergency board meeting to discuss unfair media attacks against her. She painted herself as a martyr defending community order against, entitled, rule-breaking newcomers. Meaning us. I attended that meeting. She saw me. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes went ice cold. "Danielle," she said sweetly, "I heard your husband is recovering. How wonderful for your family." The room went silent. Even her allies seemed uncomfortable with how casually she said it. I didn't flinch. "He's alive despite you delaying his treatment," I said. "We have that documented." A gasp rippled through the room. Marlene's lawyer whispered something urgent into her ear. That night, Renata called me. The board meeting audio you recorded, that's gold, Danielle. Pure gold. 2 days later, Sasha the EMT reached out through Renata, wanting to add her own statement. She described exactly how Marlene grabbed her, shoved her and disrupted life-saving compressions on Tom. Her body cam footage, requested through a Public Records Act, would become crucial evidence later. Marlene, unaware footage existed, kept insisting publicly that Sasha had provoked the confrontation. That lie would be her first real mistake, an unforced error born from arrogance. Because body cam footage doesn't lie and it was already sitting in a department server. I didn't tell anyone I knew about it yet. I let Marlene keep talking. Keep digging. Every lie she told publicly became another shovel of dirt for the grave she was building herself. 2 weeks after the incident, Marlene tried a new tactic, legal intimidation through the HOA itself. She pushed an emergency amendment fining any resident who publicly disparages board members or actions. It was thinly veiled retaliation aimed directly at me, Harold and the Nguyen's. Renata laughed out loud reading it. This is unenforceable and borderline illegal. She's panicking. We filed a formal complaint with the state's HOA Oversight Division, citing retaliatory rulemaking. Meanwhile, Tom came home from the hospital, weak but determined to fight alongside me. I want to be at every hearing, he said. She almost killed me. I want to watch her fall. That week, 3 more neighbors quietly slipped me their own citation histories, adding to our case. One was a young mother, Priya's cousin actually, fined for a unauthorized swing set for her kids. Marlene had cited it as a liability hazard, while her own grandson's trampoline sat unfined next door. Selective enforcement, documented, dated, undeniable. Our binder was becoming a small library. The local news ran a follow-up piece. Pattern of alleged HOA abuse emerges after EMT assault. Marlene's approval among neighbors cracked further. People who'd stayed silent started speaking up. Still, she had allies, 3 board members loyal to her, propped up by years of favors. One of them, Deputy Treasurer Craig Boland, controlled the HOA's financial records and access. Renata suspected something in those finances didn't add up and she requested a formal audit. Marlene fought the audit request for weeks, calling it an unnecessary witch hunt against her leadership. But Ohio law required HOA financial transparency upon petition from 10% of homeowners. We got the signatures in 4 days. Marlene had no legal way left to refuse. At the next meeting, she arrived without her usual polish, hair slightly undone, voice sharper. You people, she snapped at the crowd, have no idea what I do to protect this community. Someone in the back muttered, protected from what? Decent shutters and cardiac patients. Laughter rippled through the room. Marlene's face flushed red, fists clenched at her sides. I watched her carefully. Cracks were forming, but cracks alone wouldn't bring down her whole wall. We needed something bigger, a single undeniable fact that could not be spun, denied, or delayed. That fact arrived 3 days later, in an email from an anonymous HOA employee account. Check the reserve fund transfers from 2022, it read. Ask her about Cole Property Holdings. Cole Property Holdings. The same last name as her lawyer, Griffith Cole. My stomach dropped. Renata dug deeper and found something Marlene never expected anyone to find, a conflict of interest. Griffith Cole wasn't just Marlene's lawyer, he was her nephew and co-owner of a paving company. That paving company had won every single HOA maintenance contract for the past 6 years. No competitive bidding. No disclosure. Just Marlene, quietly funneling community funds to family. The reserve fund, money meant for emergencies, had shrunk by nearly $40,000. I stared at the numbers on my laptop screen, hands trembling with a mix of rage and hope. This wasn't just cruelty anymore. This was fraud, dressed up in HOA covenants and rulers measuring grass. We took everything to the county prosecutor's office the following Monday, evidence box in hand. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Denise Okafor, flipped through pages with a growing frown. "This is enough for a formal financial crimes investigation," she said. "Give me 2 weeks." 2 weeks. I'd waited months already. 2 weeks felt like nothing compared to that. While the investigation quietly began, Marlene remained oblivious, still fighting her assault charge publicly. She hired a PR consultant, spinning interviews about an unfair witch hunt against a dedicated volunteer. Some local outlets ate it up, running softer headlines about community tensions instead of assault. It infuriated me watching her rewrite reality in real time, one interview at a time. But I stayed quiet. Denise had warned us, leak nothing, let the investigation build in silence. Meanwhile, Sasha the EMT filed her own civil suit against Marlene for assault and battery. The body cam footage was finally released through the public records request and it was damning. It showed Marlene shoving Sasha twice before the slap, screaming about hydrant clearance the entire time. Tom, barely conscious on the ground, was visible in the background, unattended for nearly 90 seconds. 90 seconds. The doctors later confirmed that delay could have cost him his life. The footage leaked to local news despite the investigation's secrecy. Someone inside the department talked. It aired that night on every local channel and by morning, it had gone regionally viral. HOA Karens slaps EMT while husband dies on ground, the headline burned across every feed. Marlene's PR consultant quit within hours, releasing a statement distancing himself from misrepresented facts. Griffith Coles scrambled to control the narrative, but the video needed no narrative. It spoke plainly. For the first time since Tom's collapse, I watched Marlene look genuinely, publicly afraid. She tried calling an emergency board meeting to control the fallout. Nobody showed up but her allies. Even Craig Boland, her loyal treasurer, stopped answering her calls once the fraud rumors spread. Rats, it turned out, abandoned sinking ships faster than I expected, even loyal ones. The board convened an emergency session without her, invoking a clause for removing compromised officers. Marlene stormed the meeting anyway, uninvited, demanding to speak, voice cracking with desperation. "You'll destroy everything I built here," she shouted. Someone quietly replied, "That's exactly the point." The vote to suspend her pending investigation passed unanimously, 7-0, including her own allies. For the first time in 12 years, Marlene Voss was no longer in control of anything. She left the meeting alone, no lawyer, no assistant, just her heels echoing down an empty hallway. I should have felt satisfied watching her walk out. Instead, I felt the story wasn't finished yet. Because suspension wasn't justice. Suspension was just the first domino and I needed the whole line to fall. Denise Okafor called 2 days later. "We found something bigger than the paving contracts," she said. Marlene had been quietly draining resident dues into a shell account registered under her maiden name. Over the past 6 years, nearly $200,000 had vanished into that account. Fines from Harold's bench, from Priya's cousin's swing set, from Tom's shutters, all of it, siphoned. My anger reignited, sharper than before. Every petty fine had funded her private hidden fortune. "We're filing embezzlement charges," Denise said. "This is going to be a very public trial." I hung up the phone and sat in silence, finally understanding the full shape of Marlene's game. It was never about rules, hydrants, or grass length. It was always, only, about the money. Every citation had a purpose. Every fine fed the machine. We were never her community, we were her prey. Tom, listening from the couch, said quietly, "She built a whole kingdom on our fear and our fines." "Not anymore," I said, closing my laptop. "Now it's time to build the case that ends her." The criminal trial date was set for late autumn, giving us weeks to prepare our civil case too. Renata warned me the criminal trial would move slower than we wanted, bound by careful procedure. Autumn arrived and with it, the criminal trial, State of Ohio versus Marlene Voss, assault and embezzlement. The courtroom filled with familiar faces, Harold, Nguyen's, Priya's cousin, half the neighborhood. Marlene arrived in a modest gray suit, hair pulled back, playing the humbled community servant. Griffith Coles sat beside her, but as counsel now, his own conflict of interest charges pending separately. The prosecution opened with the body cam footage, silencing the courtroom within the first 30 seconds. Jurors watched Marlene shove Sasha twice, then slap her, while Tom lay unattended on the pavement. Sasha testified next, describing the exact moment Marlene's interference disrupted life-saving chest compressions. "Every second mattered," Sasha said, voice steady. "She took several of them away from him. I testified after her, describing months of fines, my folder of evidence and that final terrifying night. Marlene's lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive, obsessed, exaggerating a simple misunderstanding into revenge. Renata calmly countered with dates, receipts and recordings that proved the pattern predated any misunderstanding. Then came the financial testimony, an accountant walking the jury through Marlene's hidden shell account. $200,000, traced dollar by dollar back to citations issued against ordinary homeowners. Harold testified about his wife's memorial bench, voice breaking as he described Marlene's cold dismissal. "She told me grief wasn't an exemption from the rules," Harold said. The jury's faces hardened visibly. Marlene took the stand in her own defense, composed at first, insisting she'd only ever followed protocol. Under cross-examination, Renata asked why her nephew's paving company won every contract without competitive bidding. Marlene's composure cracked. "I don't recall the specifics of every vendor decision," she stammered. Renata produced signed documents bearing Marlene's own handwriting, awarding contracts directly to Griffith's company. "These aren't specifics you forgot," Renata said. "This is a paper trail you personally created." The courtroom murmured. Marlene's eyes darted toward Griffith, who suddenly seemed very interested in his notes. Then Renata asked the question that ended whatever was left of Marlene's credibility that day. "Why did emergency responder access matter more to you than the man dying on the pavement?" Marlene opened her mouth, closed it, then said quietly, "I was protecting community protocol." "Protocol," Renata repeated, letting the word hang in the silent courtroom for a long, damning beat. "Is that what you call it when you're profiting $200,000 off citations like his?" Objection sustained, but the damage landed exactly where it needed to. Jurors exchanged quiet, knowing glances. Closing arguments took 2 days. The prosecution painted a portrait of greed disguised as civic duty. The defense argued panic, not malice, a woman overwhelmed by stress, not a calculated predator. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. I paced the courthouse hallway, Tom's hand gripping mine tightly. When they returned, the 4 women stood and the room went utterly, breathlessly silent. "Guilty," she said, "on the charge of assault." A gasp. Then, "Guilty on embezzlement." Another gasp. "Guilty on obstruction of emergency medical services." The final charge landed like a hammer strike. Marlene sat frozen, face pale, as Griffith whispered something useless into her unhearing ear. "I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just exhaled." 12 months of held breath finally released. Sentencing was set for 3 weeks later, but the embezzlement alone guaranteed real prison time. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I gave one statement: rules should protect people, not punish them. That quote ran in every headline the next morning, alongside footage of Marlene led away in cuffs. The HOA board immediately voted to permanently remove her, appointing Priya, of all people, as interim president. Priya's first act was refunding every unjust fine, starting with Harold's bench and our garden citations. Sentencing day arrived cold and gray, fitting weather for the end of Marlene's small, cruel empire. The judge sentenced her to 4 years for embezzlement, plus 18 months for assault, served consecutively. Griffith Cole, facing his own separate fraud charges, lost his law license within the month. Craig Boland avoided prosecution by testifying against them both, though his reputation never fully recovered. Marlene was led out in handcuffs one final time, no cameras this time, just quiet finality. I watched her go, expecting triumph, but feeling instead a strange, hollow kind of exhaustion. Justice had come, but it came late and it came after real damage had already been done. Tom's heart would need monitoring for the rest of his life, a permanent souvenir of that stolen 90 seconds. Harold never got his wife's bench replaced in the exact spot, the concrete had already been repoured. Sasha changed departments, unable to work near the neighborhood where she'd been struck on duty. Some wounds, even after winning, simply don't close all the way, no matter the verdict. Priya, our new HOA president, rewrote the covenant entirely, adding transparency clauses Marlene never allowed. Every fine now required photographic evidence, a second signature and a resident appeal process. Small changes, but they mattered, proof that power, once checked, doesn't have to stay unchecked forever. 6 months later, our garden bloomed untouched, no citations, no rulers measuring our grass at midnight. Tom sat beside me on the porch, watching Priya's kids play safely on that once fine swing set. "We won," he said softly, squeezing my hand the way he had in that courthouse hallway. "We did," I said. "But we shouldn't have had to fight this hard just to be left alone." Marlene Voss remains in prison today, her name now a warning whispered at every new resident orientation. And every spring, when our garden blooms again, I remember, justice is patient, but it always arrives.